Hello, everybody. Welcome to Internet Chess Club ICC. Welcome, YouTubers. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, and today I have a special recap of the first 5 rounds from the 6th Sinquefield Cup, which is going on right now in St. Louis, Missouri. And of course, it's got the creme de la creme, the top grandmasters there, the world champion, world championship challenger. Are in action, and so I'm going to give you the lowdown on what's been going on in the first half of the tournament. Today, Thursday, is a free day, so they're resting up for that home stretch. The first game I'm going to show you is Mamedyarov against Wesley So from the first round. Shaq Mami got off to a good start. Wesley So, it seems like a lot of tournaments he gets off to a very poor start. That's maybe something he's got to work on. But so let's check out this game where Mamedyarov eventually wins in the end game. But he starts off in aggressive mode, and a little bit of a slightly unusual move order where he's kept his knight back. I'm not exactly sure what the finer points of that are. Maybe it has something to do with anticipating the Lasker variation. I was going to say with knight e4, but on h6 he takes the knight. And this idea with knight c3 is well known, but all right, he throws up h4, looking for g4, g5 mate. And so probably should react directly on the other side, maybe c5. But he decides to try to keep the king side closed, and then Mamedyarov kind of switches gears, where instead of going for, he actually literally cannot castle queenside now because it's illegal after d takes c4. I guess that's one of the big ideas of that. But now he just gets a position where his pieces just kind of get out a little bit quicker, and So doesn't like knight coming to e4, so he gives up the bishop pair. But now white is clearly better mobilized, and this makes it hard for So to deal with this situation. He can't easily develop. He's got to try to fianchetto that bishop, but now Mamedyarov getting pressure going on the king side. And so really kind of struggling with this. And now Mamedyarov starts in. Of course, the rook was attacked there, so he backs up. And this is really kind of the first, we're getting to kind of the first real interesting position. Knight g6, okay, first, even though Mamedyarov does not really have clock problems here, he just kind of tests the waters there, attacks the rook, then he decides to come back to this position. Excuse me. This interesting moment because this is kind of a cute move, takes, which is one of the moves suggested by the engine, but it's not such an unusual idea because it sets up this knight g4 threat. In fact, on bishop c8, I think white maybe could even go knight g4 right away, or rook f5, knight g4, bishop c8 could go like that. King f8, and now the engine suggests that rook h7 is even stronger than knight h6, and white has tremendous compensation really for the exchange, and it stands much better. But it's possible that what Mamedyarov did is even stronger, because it basically leads to a forced win. I think it just takes a long time before it's like 100% clear. But after rook d6, black defends, and now white gets a vastly superior rook ending. Nothing that So can do about it. I mean, this is all very forced. White gets connected past pawns. All right, so black starts attacking things, but Mamedyarov just plays this very simply. He doesn't mess around because he doesn't worry about that pawn. He's not winning the game over there. He just gets it on the other side of the board. So we have this ending where both sides have two connected passed pawns on the side. But even after black's move a5, okay, even now, white has his pawn further, and he gets the move. So he's quicker. He's just too much quicker. And the fact that the king's on the king side is even better for white because it means that his pawns will create mating threats. So it's just a very uneven race. And now Mamajärv has a little finesse. He could play g6 here, but look what he does. He checks. First he repeats. Okay, well, he's low on the clock, so he works out a little more time. Gets some moves in. And now he's running h6. All right, so rook h1, so he stops that. Well, a2, h6, so he's got to unfortunately abandon the pawn, but he still has some ideas after b5. But the thing is, white goes behind, rook b8. Okay, so the rook can't leave the first rank, but the pawn is running. Okay, king g3, and the game ends. Well, why? It's very simple. It's just a math problem here. b4, white just brings the king up. Check. King g5. Rook check doesn't help. There's no stalemates because black has a pawn. King h6. Can't stop the mate, so black can make a queen for grins, whatever. White ends up with the checkmate. So nice finish. Not amazingly complicated, but very smooth win by Mamajärv to start the tournament. And he's been playing well for a good while, and he's doing well here so far. Okay, so also Wesley So seems to be getting off to bad starts in tournaments. What the deal is there. All right. Also in the first round, the Minister of Defense was deposed by Aronian. Aronian defeated Karyakin in a long endgame, which was a Berlin defense. This tournament marked the return of the Berlin defense, as we had not only Aronian Karyakin, but also Vache Lagrave against So and Karyakin Grishuk. So 3 Berlin endgames in the first 5 rounds. So what happened? The Berlin defense, the Berlin endgame basically disappeared from the elite games for months and months. They played D3 every game. Nobody went into it. And suddenly they're thinking like, well, maybe. I don't know. Is it, Aronian wins one game and they all change their minds? But anyway, I'm not going to show the Aronian Karyakin game because, frankly, I don't really have anything to add to what happened. It just shows that you get bishops opposite colors, you make pass pawns on both sides, separated pass pawns, and that's usually enough to overcome the drawish potential of the bishops opposite colors. So Aronian, who is not normally an e4 player, starts by taking down Karyakin, and then the Minister of Defense. Well, he really has to resign his post after losing another long endgame in the second round, this time to Magnus Carlsen. So let's take a look at that. Now, this opening is kind of curious. c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. This is kind of weird stuff that Joel Benjamin might do in the opening, but I would find some way to trade my knight and put all my pawns on dark squares. Karyakin kind of moves into more normal territory with d5. And after a3, he backs up to e7. So what we get is a transposition into the Catalan, which tends to be very theoretical. Carlsen is not always a big fan of those theoretical battles, but he plays a line which I think really kind of gets it out of the theory and moves it into the territory of a squeezing kind of game. Also in this position, white takes on c4, cd, queen d4, and I think e5 is the main move, and black hopes for compensation for the exchange. White of course missing the bishop, but he goes in a different direction. Now this position, I think this is actually not a known position with the pawn on a3. It's a small subtle difference. I don't know if it changes all that much, but with the pawn on a2, it's a very well known position. And here Carlsen plays rook d1, which is the most common move with the pawn on a2. But remember this setup here, we're going to get back to it later in the show because something else is going to happen in this opening later on. That was very, very interesting. So, but anyway, Carlsen plays rook to d1. Now, I'm not really a big fan of the way Karyakin plays the next few moves, although objectively it's probably equal, maybe not, not a position you should lose. But I think that Black doesn't have to go for that rigid kind of pawn structure. I kind of like the idea of playing bishop b7 and if castles knight d5, and if he takes it, you could take with the bishop. I mean, why is there any reason why it's bad to take with the bishop? I don't see it. Or if white plays bishop d4, you can bring a rook to the file and maybe take with the rook. I don't know. I just like that better. I admit to not being an expert in this opening, but the way that Karyakin plays this is a little bit grovelly, in my opinion. He gets this very rigid pawn structure, and of course there's no obvious way for white to win. He can't break down the center. Perhaps he could have played... no, why didn't he try queen e4? I just noticed that. I suppose he's going to lose his a pawn. Right? Queen e4 takes, pawn takes, bishop takes a7. Yeah, it's a back rank trick. That's actually a bad pawn to lose too, because that gives white a passed pawn, and that could be trouble. So, rook d7. Now queen e4 is a threat. Okay, well, he still could play it, but white's going to get the d file and maybe even win a pawn. So, black doesn't have to be that desperate to trade. All right, so the queens come off. And, I'm going to let most of these moves go by without comment because it's, it's hard to really get into the minutiae of all this. But, of course, Carlsen makes a lot of little moves, just trying to incrementally improve. And, if he doesn't, he can always back up. So, there is an idea to attack with g5, but not that easy to organize because of the pressure on e2. All right, now Carlsen sacrifices an exchange and everybody oohs and ahs. But really, this is a very stock kind of exchange sacrifice. And even though it probably shouldn't win, it's clear to any strong player that this is an unpleasant situation for black, really just waiting around defending, and white has a much easier time improving the position. Now, the first question is, why doesn't black defend the pawn on c4? I don't really see any good reason not to hold it, because what else is going on here? Why not? He gives up the pawn, and so white says, okay, now I got two pawns. I mean, it's still... Oh, and Carlsen, of course, want to make sure not to give counterplay. I mean, he's got one extra pawn here, one extra pawn here. It's not easy to break through with that, but... little by little. And I think it makes a big difference that the c4 pawn isn't there, because, if the pawn is, black still has that pawn, he can consider maybe trying to set up some kind of exchange sacrifice. But now all these exchange sacrifices are come up short, so he's just got to keep playing. I guess he could consider rook takes c3 and rook takes a5, but okay, he's clearly a pawn down. I think that wouldn't work because the white king is too close to protecting the passed pawn, and that definitely looks like there's winning chances. So he just keeps waiting. Like, just, not allowing counterplay, not exactly knowing where the pieces are, but he doesn't really have to be in a rush to do anything. He can just make moves and get more time to think. And eventually something happens. Black plays g5, which everybody generally felt was a good idea, because, if white gets in g5, then either a lot of bad things can happen for black. He can have a weak pawn in f6. He could pawn get to g6 and create mate threats. He could get, or black could take on g5, and the e pawn could start to get loose. But now they liquidate to what looks like a draw, but it doesn't turn out to be a draw because right around here, Karyakin, well, he's low on time, as because they now have these sudden death time controls. He blunders with king c6, but really a pretty simple move, rook check, and rook check again. There's no place for the king to go, so I don't see any other try but bishop d4. And then rook d8, creating more threats against the bishop. And that seems to hold. The engine's actually zero out here. But what he did was kind of clearly a loss. King c6, check, check again, and now the pawn is loose. I think with Karyakin, with seconds on his clock, what he missed was that white does not have to play king g6, rook g8, and get shunted to the h file, where then black could even get some delusions of winning, but a little finesse, king e5, and now when he comes to the g file, he prevents that rook check, and basically it's all over. White pushes the pawn to the 7th, and he could try to even various ideas of queening directly, but he just simply takes his pawn on a6, and he can queen the e pawn, or he can queen the a pawn. It's black in the long run has no hope of stopping any of this. So Carlsen, with that technical win, Karyakin shaking his head, losing long end games. He's supposed to hold everything, but not able to do it there. Okay, so one of the interesting we've found one development is the Berlin endgame. Another development in this tournament is the question of what is a dead drawn position. There's been some controversy here because they're playing with, I guess, with the Sophia rules, they've called it, where there are no offered draws. I mean, a draw has to be no pieces left, or perpetual, or repetition. The repetition, of course, as we know, is a foggy area, or a dead draw. And there was a game where the players were allowed to agree to a draw, and then it was decided that maybe it wasn't a dead drawn position. That is kind of the problem with the Sophia rules. I think that maybe just have a move limit like 40, even 50 moves before draw offers, because what tends to happen is, and you've seen in this tournament a lot of games where there's just like a lot of liquidation, and like kind of an even position. Suddenly lots of pieces get traded, and then they sort of contrive to go back and forth. It's just a way to kind of circumvent the rule. And it's understood that, yeah, they're doing this because it's a stupid position and they should be allowed to offer a draw at this point. Well, so there's been a lot of repetitions because you can't actually just offer and shake hands. But one repetition in this tournament was legitimate, and that was Grishuk against Mamedyarov. That's my big lead up into this game. And this was actually a pretty exciting game, as they contested a winner variation, bishop a5, which I think is actually Armenian specialty. I don't know how that would sit with Mamedyarov, but this line has been kind of rehabilitated recently. It was thought to be not very good for black for a long time, and queen g4 I think is kind of the prescribed move. But instead of knight e7, Mamedyarov and other people have been playing king f8, and thus with the knight not coming to d6 with check, then the bishop can go to b6 and defend the d4 pawn, at least for a while, and that leads to, at least it seems that white is not actually getting an edge out of this opening. So I would propose that white could do some things differently. Like, for instance, one idea is to play knight b5 right away, and if bishop c7, f4. All right, and what else can he do? Another idea is to even scrap the b4 and go queen g4 right away. Because now if king f8, the position is more open. White can take on c5 and just, maybe try to play a more open position. And with the king is, stuck on f8, black can't castle. So if knight e7 and then maybe b4 here, just a thought. Because I've seen this line before. I've looked at it a little bit because my main man John Burke had a game in this variation a little while ago, and I looked over the game with him, and I was surprised to see that black has pretty good resources in this variation, but this all has happened a few times, all these moves, and black actually is prepared to give up a pawn over there, but he gets rid of that light squared bishop, and it's actually hard for white to maintain the center. I think that Burke's opponent took the knight here, but most of the games black is taking on e5, takes, and now there are some games with queen takes e5, but that doesn't look all that impressive for white either. Black seems to be in the neighborhood of equality, so Grishik tries knight f3, and it kind of looks like it maybe should be more than it is, but just having that knight on e5 is not all that much because black has this mass of pawns around it, queen e7 and knight g4. It looks vaguely threatening, but black can actually even think about being better after e5, which Mamedyarov didn't play, and it is the engine suggestion. And perhaps black can even be slightly better. Those two bishops are nice, and his pieces are all covering his king very well. And where should white put his king? Because he doesn't necessarily enjoy the idea of putting his king on the king side with that open H file. But instead of e5, which would have led to a more interesting game, Mamedyarov simply played bishop d7, and now it's really now or never because black is consolidating, white doesn't really have anything, so he goes check, king f8, and knight h7. And this is where we have a repetition draw, which is totally legitimate because it's just the best thing that white can do, and black can't really avoid the repetition. But most of the repetition draws in this tournament have been very odd, pieces moving to squares where they certainly don't have to move to. All right. Well, another interesting story in this tournament is an unusual Twitter skirmish that broke out after a game from the third round between Levon Aronian and Magnus Carlsen. Okay, I'm just gonna get quickly to the main position. I mean, it was one of these Joko pianos. Now Aronian, okay, he's come armed with e4. Well, the thing about that is that most of these guys are pretty predictable in what they're going to do. You can predict e4, e5. It's unlikely that any of these guys really is going to vary from that, except for MVL. He's going to play the Najdorf, and he is playing the Najdorf. I don't actually plan to show any of those games, but you take my word for it, he's playing the Najdorf. So Aronian plays with an early b4. And Carlsen plays kind of solidly. But, he strikes back with his d5. And it looks slightly precarious because he gets his queen in an awkward spot. And he could get it off the file with queen takes d5, but after rook a d1, I think he has to go back queen e5 into the path of the rook anyway. So he plays pawn takes. And this is where we get the Twitter war, right? Because Aronian plays rook a d1, and I'll just show you the rest of the game. Wasn't anything special. Basically, it was kind of a boring position. Okay, good take on e6, but that pawn on e6 is not going to be easily attackable, and the d5 pawn, of course, then is defended. So, white has an isolated pawn. Sorry, black has an isolated pawn, but the c3 pawn is also a target. So eventually we just have this simplification. Okay, rook e1, nice trick. It doesn't win a rook or a queen here, but it leads to a somewhat more legitimate repetition by perpetual check. It's kind of their way of offering a draw when they decide it's time for a draw. Okay, but anyway, let's go back to that position where white played rook a d1. Well, there's a very interesting move here. Bishop takes a7. Oops, I got to take back rook a d1, don't I? Otherwise it's cheating. Although it would lead to the same position with the rook already on d1. All right, bishop a7. Black has to take two rooks for a queen. Takes queen d2. Admittedly, looks pretty good, and a lot of people were wondering why Aronian didn't do it. For instance, Michael Golyabev tweeted how it's possible that Lev Aronian hasn't played bishop takes a7, an obvious and a good move. Opponents are simply too afraid of, at Magnus Carlsen, in the Twitter sphere, he dominates them psychologically. So they can't believe that their queen can be stronger than his two rooks. That's a bold statement, but there could be an element of truth to it, and certainly players are not sitting there being consciously afraid of Magnus, but who knows? Maybe Aronian against a different player might have chanced this. But Aronian was not really happy to hear that, so he tweeted back, "Dear Michael, you are most likely fooled by weak chess engine's evaluation. If you analyze the position without a bias, you will see that black is at least holding the draw with two rooks against the queen." Well, probably Levon has a little bit of a bias himself because he's got to defend himself. His ego is definitely on the line there, and so he probably would have to objectively admit that maybe this was a better winning chance than what he did. Well, what can black do? The rook has to go back, and I think he really has to go back to e6, because if he goes to e8, queen d4 and knight coming to f5, it's white's going to create a threat on the king side. So we could see after rook e6 something like this, queen f4. Actually, I should, sorry, before I show you the moves, I should show you Golyabov's response to that. He said, "Dear Levon, I have been taught that queen plus knight is generally a strong pair, and that a rook on a7 stands poorly, and probably was fooled by that. My weak understanding is that it's white who is better after bishop takes a7, but I can believe indeed that black holds it." Okay, so he throws him a little bone at the end. I can believe that black holds. Of course, I'm sure that Michael Golyabov, like really anybody in the world, has great respect for Aronian's level of play and skill and understanding, but he's a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, I suppose. That obviously rook on a7 does stand poorly, and he wasn't really fooled by that. But anyway, the weak engine line goes something like this, and and white is winning a pawn after that, and has what the weak engines say. At least the weak engine I turned on said white is clearly better. Not necessarily winning, but clearly better. So that was that. That was kind of a little interesting give and take there. Aronian was challenged for his moves, but it's something to think about. And I really believe that Fabiano Caruana is not afraid of Carlsen. He's not afraid. I'm going to actually get to that a little bit later, and that's why I kind of feel good about his chances. Okay, next story is there were a couple of knockouts or knockdowns, however you want to call it. Nakamura starting to run into trouble from round 3. Now I'm going to basically fast forward in this game pretty much because I really want to get to the highlights, and otherwise we'd never have time for the show. So this is sort of known theory, and I think the first move comes up right about here, c4. Attempted improvement, it does control the d5 square. But the thing is, even though black has these very ugly pawns on the c file, white has an ugly pawn on d3. Okay, black liquidates his. I love that word, liquidate. He liquidates the his isolated A pawn, creates a potential weakness on B3, and black is getting the better of this maneuvering. So now he's starting to come forward. Well, white hasn't really achieved much. Grishuk taking his time. It was a little bit short of time. I mean, taking his time literally on the clock, but also taking his time with the moves. And after knight g3, c6. Okay, white has to take on h5, but after c takes d5, black still standing better. But this was even worse because now the d3 pawn drops. But okay, Nakamura stubbornly defends, and he is a stubborn player, and he's not easy to knock out. But Grishuk plugs away, and eventually they liquidate more. And so Nakamura tries to create a little bit of a blockade. One of the bishops is not very good for black. And eventually white gets worn down on the king side and the h-pawn drops. So he says, okay, I got to give the h-pawn. And now black liquidates. As I said, I love that, but not into a pawn ending. He liquidates into a bishop ending. No chance for counterplay. And the only hope for Nakamura is that he can manage some kind of blockade. But the blockade does not hold up because black starts with f3. Okay. First point is king g3, f2. The bishop drops. So let's see. What else? So he's got to move the bishop back. So bishop f2. Bishop f6. All right, now king g3, bishop h4. That does liquidate into the pawn ending. Woohoo. Bishop takes c5 would not help much. It's not a great pawn anyway. And black plays bishop h4, followed by with the idea of bishop e1 and yeah. Once he gets that, actually, once he walls off the king like that, then he can just bring his king all the way around the other side if he wants. So the bishop on h4 is really just decisive in itself. The c5 pawn really doesn't make much difference. So Nakamura waits, defends it for now, and he's really kind of tempoing. All right, bishop f2. Interestingly, bishop f2, bishop g5 would be kind of Zugzwang, right? Because now bishop g3, bishop e3, king g3, bishop h4. I mean, there just isn't any move. So sometimes it looks like random moves are being made, but it could be kind of a tempo-y thing. All right, now king g5, showtime. If bishop h4 check, king f4 takes, king takes e4, and black plays king e3 and king e2, and the too many pawns for the bishop to control. Right? The best he can do is a lost pawn ending. So he tries bishop takes e5, bishop f6. The bishop comes in. He's got two passed pawns going, and two passed pawns are better than one. If white plays e5 at any moment, king f5, and black well, he doesn't even really have to take that pawn. He can just keep pushing his stuff, and eventually white will have to give the e-pawn anyway. So he pushes his pawn all the way up. And that's that. Black is ready to play bishop f4. And, then that could be, that might be pawn ending, yeah. Bishop f4 takes. White can stop the pawn from queening, but he loses on the other side. So nice technique by Grishuk, not tremendously difficult for such a strong grandmaster, but kind of instructor for everybody else. Okay, so Nakamura, that was round 3, and round 4 also went badly for Hikaru as he walked into a surprising novelty from Caruana. Now, Caruana is mainly an e4 player, but I'm sure he really studies everything from every perspective, and of course, with his match coming up, he's got to really be ready for anything. And I guess he maybe felt that he wasn't going to get this. He was not going to get this against Carlsen. It would be funny if Carlsen said, like, "Oh man, and I was going to play that in November too." Right? All right, so, but they get the same opening. I mean, a slightly different move order. So this is what Carlsen had against Karyakin, but with the pawn on a3. I mean, probably a minor difference. Castles. This is a novelty, and Caruana's reasoning was, well, the queen side is pretty solid, that blockade on c3, but here now I can think about just shoving the king side pawns forward for an attack because I don't have my king sitting, let's say, on f2. And Nakamura couldn't really find the answer to it. Well, he could have played maybe in a standard kind of way with something like bishop b7, but he, I guess, tried to kind of refute the move by playing knight g4 because the bishop can't move away with f2 pawn, but he just left it there. And although these e-pawns are ugly, the bishop on c8 is really kind of dominated, and the knight plays very well against it. Again, you can find something in the minutiae of these moves, which I'm not going to really go too deeply into, but basically we have a lot of maneuvering, and that bishop can't really attack anything. So there's some situations where the knight is really just much more pleasant to play with. And then, I think some commentators felt that he should not have allowed this queen trade. Now the rooks are able to play, and also white can start thinking about bringing his king into the game, which he starts to do. And as black looks for counterplay, this actually maybe accelerates his demise, especially after this mistake, f takes e4. He should have left that there and taken, probably with the king on g5, actually, because if the pawn takes, the rook can come to h1 and threaten to get into h7. But after pawn takes e4, king e3, he's in a lot of trouble here. And it did not get better with bishop c6, rook e7, and now now king d4 is a threat. Black takes on g5 with the pawn. King d4 is strong. King takes rook g7 is actually mate. So he takes with the rook. He loses his pawn, and now it becomes really matter of technique. This check would not work because after rook d6, king h5, rook e6, attacks the bishop, attacks h6, and something drops, and the black king is also in a lot of trouble. So not good. That's a cool finesse, because if pawn takes, rook check, the king has to come up in whichever square. It's a strange kind of ladder made in the middle of the board, right? So, all right, but now white liquidates that weakness, and it's pretty much clear sailing. He grabs his pawn, and knight d6 is kind of a killing move, forking the rooks. Now black can defend everything by bringing this rook to c5, but then beautiful consolidating move e4, cutting off all the squares. The rooks are just starved of moves. Knight f5 is, I suppose, a threat, although white doesn't necessarily need it. Black can hardly move anything. Totally winning position for white. So Nakamura resigned, dropped down to -2, and Caruana scoring a big win in a tournament where he's been, perhaps a little bit on the verge of wins in other games. He hasn't quite been able to knock out his opponents, but he he had a game against Mamedyarov where he actually kind of impressed his opponent a little bit, and Mamedyarov said so. And this is what happened. Again, I'm going to go pretty much quickly through the opening just to really cover more ground like that. All right, it's a pretty sharp one. A one which I'm vaguely familiar with, but I don't know great detail about it. And I do recall that I think Rook B8 is a new move, and Black's played Bishop B7 in other games, but okay, doesn't seem too outlandish to put the Rook on that open file. But as the game went on, it started to come out pretty good for Black, because White is just a little bit exposed on the king side. There's some avenues into his position. All right, so they get to this position. White plays Queen D5. Okay, can't take the C5 pawn because Rook C8 pin. So this, I suppose, threatens to take it. So Rook D8, Queen C4. If Rook D3, then he can take it, so he goes back. And they go back and forth for a while, and then A5. And I believe that Mamedyarov said later that it was very good of Caruana that he didn't take that repetition. So the fans, a lot of fans think that the grandmasters just want to draw all the time, but no, I mean, Caruana has really good fighting spirit, and he showed it here. And Caruana said in return, Mamedyarov said that this willingness to prosecute a small advantage will be very important against Magnus Carlsen in the match. And Caruana said, I think I would definitely play out this position against Magnus, because it's so hard to win a chess game. Whenever you have anything to work with, you got to try. You got to expect that wins will be hard work. They won't be easy. So it's kind of a little bit of an encouraging moment. Now, Caruana didn't quite manage to win the game, but it was kind of like he kept like a small nagging advantage for the whole game. And I could not see where he missed any real big opportunities. Maybe his moves were not the most exact. I think I saw a computer suggest H4 there. But basically he has, like a small initiative the whole way, but Mamedyarov just defends it pretty stubbornly. And now he's basically in the area of equality. If he takes on C3 and Black gets to take F4, okay, then a pawn might drop. But Mamedyarov is more inclined to trade the A pawn for the C pawn, keep his pawns intact, and he just didn't give any opportunities here, and so the game soon ends in a draw. Caruana pressed it for a while, but it's just not getting anywhere. Kind of going around in circles. But the fact that he was willing to try, it is a good sign. It is a good sign, and that's the way it is. And I think, for fans who think that these guys, still have this idea that all these guys want to do is draw. They draw a lot because it's just hard to win these games, and sometimes you do work hard to try to win that game, and it's still not quite able to do it. All right, so in round 5, all the games were drawn, but there was one game that when I played over the moves, I was really surprised at the result, because it just seemed to me that Magnus Carlsen reached a position against Wesley So that was winning, and it actually was not winning. And again, I'm gonna pretty much fast forward this. What was it? It was Semi-Tarish, which has become popular again in the last couple of years. I think Kramnik did a lot to bring it back. And it's, an IQP position, but Carlsen, he doesn't play it to try to get the king side attack, and he doesn't go for d5, I guess, for whatever reason. Maybe the knight just moves here. So he set up bishop f4 attack, but then he didn't follow through with it. He played bishop g5. I don't know if there was a Greek bishop sacrifice if he takes, but he's hoping to exploit this. And it doesn't look at first like he gets that much, but then he makes this pass pawn, right? And that pass pawn looks pretty strong. He's giving stuff up, but he's got that pass pawn. It looks like it could be dangerous. Sometimes you get the pass pawn, then you really just use it to tie the guy up and get a kingside attack. So Wesley So gives the 2 rooks for the queen. He can believe that his queen is better than Magnus's 2 rooks. He could do it. Rook d7. So he can get rid of that nasty pass pawn, but then I guess white takes an f7 and splits the pawns, and then those rooks are ready to jump on all the pawns. So he actually so he plays a5. Okay, he can't take any pawns because the rooks are tethered together. But he gets the pawn to the 7th rank. And I thought, how could this not be winning? But it turns out it really isn't winning, yeah? Because, okay, rook d2, right? Queen check. He goes back. Now, what if king g2? Because it seems like white just has to move the rook on d7 to the side, and then the rook to d8, and then he queens. Well, it turns out it's not winning. Black can even just calmly play king g6. If rook e7, okay, he can go queen check. Now f3 is just not a threatening move for black. Black doesn't even have to do anything. He can just play b4 if he wants. Because if the rook on d2 leaves, queen c2, it's going to be an easy perpetual. Right? So f3 doesn't help at all. All right. So let's take place king h2, queen c5. Now, okay, it hits the rook. It's not really threatening to take the rook, but really mostly he's attacking the pawn on f2. So if the rook d2 comes down to d8, queen f2, another perpetual, and there's just no way for white to organize with these rooks without allowing a perpetual. So it just seems like that pawn on c7 is so strong and should get through, but it doesn't. And Wesley So was able to hold the draw. Okay, so that is what I have for games. Let me just what we call the Sinquefield 18. Let me just update the scores for you, and we're a little bit long, but I don't know if there's been any questions. If there are any good ones, I might take one. So after round 5, we have a 5 spot of leaders. It's a pretty tightly packed tournament. Okay, just 3-2 plus 1 is in the lead. Magnus Carlsen won that long grinding game and has drawn the other games. And Caruana beat Nakamura. He also has 3, and Mamedyarov won that first game against So and has drawn the games after that. Aronian also plus 1, having beaten Karyakin in that long game, and Grishuk with his victory over Nakamura that we saw at plus 1. And then there's a couple of guys that I really have not, MVL, I really have not talked much about him because I believe he's drawn every game, and so has Vichy, who is pretty good at that sort of thing. Both of them at 2.5, Wesley So with 2, and then the 2 unfortunates with 2 losses so far, Hikaru Nakamura and Sergei Karyakin are bringing up the rear with 1.5 points. I guess we'll finish up there. Of course, there are. This is the end of the first half. This is the second half of the tournament coming up. We are relaying the moves live on ICC, so you can follow the games here. And also, if you have any interest in seeing uh, going through all the moves from any of the games that I talked about or any of the games that I didn't talk about. We have all that stuff on the we have the day's games on the events page, or you could look up Sinquefield 18 to configure that for information of the tournament, or go get the lib list of Sinquefield 18 to look at all the games that have been played so far. But we also will be, as I said, we will be showing the games live for the rest of the tournament. And yeah, I mean, it should be an interesting finish, as at this point, a lot of people still have a chance for victory here. And of course, there's a certain angle to this tournament in that you have the champion Magnus Carlsen, and I'm trying to think if I think he's playing in some kind of team tournament, like European club team tournament. I think he's playing one more event before the World Championship, and Fabiano, of course, is going to play for the U.S. on the Olympiad, and that's kind of interesting because when you're playing the Olympiad, you don't want to mess around. I think the problem for Magnus is that in some years he's played in the Olympiad and his team is not really a medal contender, and he doesn't necessarily want to go and give any stuff away. But for Caruana, the Olympiad is important enough that he's really got to be there, especially with the U.S. being defending champions and having a powerhouse team. On paper, maybe the best team, maybe objectively the best team is going to be the same players as last time. So we got those two guys who have that match coming up in November. It's already late August. It's getting closer and closer, and they're kind of thinking about it. Carlsen, I think, has played the Sicilian a couple of times here, which we rarely see from him. He's maybe trying to, throw some monkey wrenches out there. Who knows? Maybe a little disinformation. But it will be, it's always a very interesting sport to think about. What openings are they going to really try it out when they get to that match? Of course, there's some bragging rights, but really the most important event will be then in November. And of course, all these other players. This is one of the biggest tournaments with a lot of the elite players, of course, prize money on the line. So that's the deal for now from St. Louis. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin. And you guys can see me doing my weekly show, GM Joel's Chess Week Recap. I think we should have another show out for you tomorrow if you're watching this live on Thursday. And I hope that you'll be watching my show week to week, because I think it's a good show. I work hard on it. But for now, this has been the recap of the first 5 rounds of the Sinquefield Cup. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care, everybody.